Hey everyone, in this video we're going to go and create a new React component, and in our component we're going to use the Material UI framework to just select a button, and we're going to get that button to do something. So we're going to console log something in the browser just to make sure that it works. So if you are new to React, there's some previous videos on this channel that'll bring you up to speed. So basically what we've done so far in this React application is we've used the create React app, and then we've just added one component, and the component that we added, we called it my first component. But if you haven't got this, it doesn't matter, because we're going to be creating a new component in this video. So what we're going to do is we're going to just run npm start just to see what's being displayed onto the screen in the browser. So we're starting up our server now, so our web browser is going to open up, and as you can see, we can see the React logo, and we can see my second component down here. We should actually probably change that to my first, but it doesn't really make too much difference for this video, so have it at my first component. So what we want to go and do now is we want to go into our components folder, which we made in our last video, and instead of having my first component, we want to go and create a new file, and you can call this file whatever you want. I'm just going to call it component with button. Again, this is not a great name, but it makes a little bit more sense when you're trying to learn React and how to use components. So we've made our component, we've called it component with button.js, and now we're just going to go to the my first component, and we're going to just copy this. So I'm just going to copy all of this, and we're going to paste it into our newly created component, and we just need to rename a couple of things. So rather than having my first component as a name, we'll call it component with button. So once we've got this, we can go and rename our class name, and we can also rename the export. So once we've done this, just to make it a little bit clearer when we do display it onto the screen, we can put our paragraph saying my component with button. So we can save that now. There's a couple more things we have to do before we can actually use this component to view it in the browser. One thing is we have to go and add it into a component that's currently being displayed. So for example, if we go and save this now and we go to the browser and we refresh, we can see nothing's changed. So we still have got our first component down here, and then the boilerplate React code that we had beforehand. So what we need to do now is we need to go and add this component with button into one of our other components. So we could add it into this my first component here that we've created previously, but if you haven't got this, don't worry about it, because we're going to add it into app.js. So app.js is a default component that's already built for us. So to use it, we can go and import the component that we've just created. We'll say import component with button, and we're going to import it from, and now we need to go to our directory. So we'll say /components/component with button. So now we can actually use this component that we've created. So if we just go and copy this name, depending on where we want to display it in our app component, I'm going to display it at the top of the page, because we've already got our first component being displayed at the bottom of our page. So just inside this div, we're going to paste in our component name, and we're going to end it with / and a greater than sign, and just at the beginning we're going to add in a less than sign. So if we go and save this now, we can see it's compiled successfully. So if we go to the browser, hopefully we should see something. So, and we do, we can see my component with button, right? So this is fine. This is just basically a second component that we've made, and we've displayed it to the screen. But now we want to go and add a button. We want to go and get a button that we can click, and then we can either show something or at least console log it to the console in the browser. So what we need to do now is we need to go to Material UI. So Material UI is a UI framework that we can use. It has buttons and forms and all types of things that we can use to speed up our front end development. And it's a little bit like Bootstrap, if you've ever used Bootstrap before, but a little bit more powerful. So if you just go to Google and Google Material UI, it should be the first link you find. So it's a popular React UI framework. Unlike Bootstrap, Bootstrap does have its own React strap that you can use for React, but in my opinion, Material UI has more to offer. So if we go to the home page, we can see there's an npm install. So if we just go and copy this and go back to our IDE, we need to stop this run on port 3000 for the minute, so we can hit Control C to cancel that, and then Control V to copy the npm install. So this will just take a couple of seconds. It's installing the Material UI framework within our application so that we can use it. If you go back to the browser, you can also use a link, so a CDN, rather than using an npm install. But in my opinion, it's just easier to go and use the npm install to have all the Material UI features that you need. But it's your choice, it's up to you. So if we go back to our IDE, we can see that it has been successful. So it's been added to our package.json. And now what we want to do is we want to go and implement or create a button in our component. So our component with button. And to do this, we need to do a couple of different things. So I'm going to go back to the documentation just to show you where I'm getting this code from. So this is the documentation. If you just go and click on this button here and you go to components, so we're going to click on components, and you can see there's a long list of different features that you can use. There's buttons, button groups, checkboxes, radio buttons, date and time, sliders, switches, and everything else. But for this video, we're only interested in using a button. So we've clicked on the button documentation, and we can see we've got some different types of buttons here that we can use just as examples. So we've got 5 different types of buttons. And if we go and click this button here, this will show us the source code. So the code that we have to write in React to go and use these buttons. Now there's 5 buttons here, and you can see there's 5 buttons here. We don't want all 5 buttons, we're just going to grab one of them. So for example, we could grab this one here, this primary button. It's got a nice blue background with some black text. So if we go and just copy this, so this is the primary button here, because we can see this is the text primary. So if we just copy this and then go back to Visual Studio, we have to decide where we want to put this button. So I'm just going to put it underneath our paragraph that we have, and just line this up a little bit better. Okay, so now we've got our button, but this is not going to actually work for us yet, because if we were to go and npm start, try and run this, we'd get an error because it doesn't really know what we're looking for. So you can see it's failed to compile because it doesn't quite understand what this button thing is that we're looking for. And the reason for this is because we haven't imported, or we haven't said that we want to use this particular type of button in the Material UI framework. So we've npm installed it, so it is on our system, but this file isn't aware of it. So our project is aware of the UI framework, but our component with button.js file does not know about it. So if we go back to the documentation, we'll see there's an import at the top of the screen. So we need to go and copy this here. So we're going to import the button from the Material UI framework. And if we just put this at the very top and hit save, it should compile successfully now. So as you can see, it's running. So we're going to go back to our browser, and now you can see we've got this nice primary button here. It's not the best. As you can see, this button is pressed right up against our main component, or the boilerplate that React has given us. So we could do with a little bit of, spacing. So to do this, we can actually go back to the documentation, and you can see that the documentation uses this use styles, and this use styles has a root property, and this has a margin, and this spacing is 1. So 1 should be enough just to make it look a little bit nicer. So if we go and copy this here, we're going to copy this use styles, and then we're going to go back to our IDE. If we put it in here, now if we go and try and save this, we're going to run into an issue again, and it's the same issue as before. It's because we haven't actually got the make styles imported from the Material UI framework. So if we just go and copy this line here and go back to our Visual Studio and import it at the top, it should work. So as you can see now, it's compiled. It's got some warnings. It says use styles is assigned but it's never used, and that's true. So we've got use styles and we've got our styling, but we haven't assigned it to anything. So we haven't assigned it to a particular div. So again, that's where we're going to go back to our Material UI documentation. And if you go and look here with our div, you can see that there's a class name, and it is going to use classes.root, which is this here. So if we just go and copy this div here and go back, and we can go and replace this here because we don't really need it. So just inside return, if we go and paste that in here, we can see there's no need to keep this class name components with button because we don't really need it. The only reason that we would keep this is that we had a paragraph and we had a button, so we wouldn't be able to render this unless we had an outside div. But since we're going to replace that with another div, we can get rid of this, and we're going to keep that div down there because that's going to be our closing div for this one here that we just pasted in there. So if we go and save this now, we need to go and take this variable use styles, and we need to just take it outside the function. So if we just put it out here, and then with inside our function, we can go and create a constant. We can call it classes. As you can see, this is what they use here. So again, just going back to the documentation, if we look inside the function, so this is the function here, just inside the function, they've created a constant called classes, and they have use styles outside of that function. So just inside the function, we're going to paste in classes. Make sure that this is inside the function, but it's not inside the return. Otherwise, it won't work. So if you hit Control S to save, and then go back to your browser, you should see that we've now got a little bit of spacing between our button and the next component that we're using. So what we can do now is we can go and make a couple of changes just to, make sure that, this button works. So as you can see, when we hover over this button, it gets slightly darker. So that's just an extra, added piece of functionality that's thrown in there with the Material UI. You can disable that if you want, but I think it's a nice touch. So I'm going to leave it in there. I'm not going to override it. But if you go and press this button, you can also see it kind of notifies you that it's been pressed. It kind of makes a little white flicker throughout the button, but it doesn't actually do anything, right? So what we want to do is we want to go and just console log something to make sure that our button is working. So if we hit F12 in Google Chrome and we go to our console tab, we want to just console log something saying, button was clicked or whatever. So if we go back into our IDE, on this button here, we've got some properties. We've got it contained, and we've got a color, but we also want to go and add an on click. So if we just go down to our next line and we just say on click, and when we do our on click, we need to go and call a function. So we haven't created a function yet. We don't have a function, but we're going to go and create it. And we're going to call our function click function, right? So when we do this, we set our on click and we set that equal to the name of our function, and our function has to be in curly brackets. So to do this, we just type in the function name, so click function, and now we've got to go and create our function. Now when we're creating our function, make sure that we're creating our function inside our component with button function. But again, a bit like our const variable that we created here, make sure it's not inside the return. So we'd put this function just after our classes variable. So in a similar way of how you would create a function in just vanilla JavaScript, we say function, the keyword, and then whatever name of the function we want to call it, and then after that we add in our round brackets. Now we're not going to take in any parameters here, we're just going to go and print out something, so we don't have to worry about taking in any parameters. And then we've got our curly brackets, and we're just going to console log something. So I'm going to say the button was clicked. Now if we go and save this and we go back to our browser, hopefully now when we click this button here, that something's going to show up in our console to notify us that we've actually clicked the button. So if we go and click this primary button, we can see the button was clicked, has popped up in our console. And if we click it again, the same thing happens. You see it's got a little 2 here, and 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and so on. Now, primary isn't the best name for this button, so we could change this to something else. Rather than having the name primary, we could say something like click me. And if we go and save this and we go back to our browser, now it says click me, and it does the same thing, right? So every time you click it, we get notified in the console. So I hope you've learned a couple of things from this video. I hope you have a better understanding of components and how to create them. We learned a little bit about the Material UI framework, React framework, and we created a button using the Material UI React framework, and we also got that button to do some piece of functionality. So when it was clicked, we displayed something out to the console. Now, if you are making a large-scale application, you wouldn't be using the console to display your information. You'd be using this component or maybe another component to go and display information when a button's clicked. So for example, if it was something like a shopping cart, if you had a picture of an item that you wanted to purchase and there was a button that said add to cart, when you click add to cart, then you could have another component, and then that component would be updated and you'd see that the item that you had clicked to add to the cart was now added to your cart. If you like the video, give it a like, and if you want to see more, hit that subscribe button. Have a good day.